guys, welcome back to Off Topic with Caitlin
and Linnea.
And today our topic is going to be talking about red flags. We're going to be talking about kind of like how a lot of the times we tend to overlook red flags and not focus on our standards and our beliefs and who we are, and we kind of overlook them, and they tend to affect us a lot more than we think they do. And so we're just going to be talking about that and what you do in that situation.
All right, guys, let's get off topic. All right, guys, as we talked about in the intro, we are talking about red flags and not letting them change our standards. I think this is a very important topic and something that I have been personally learning a lot in my life. I think sometimes in life we can quickly let, our standards or things that we see change by, like, the things that are influencing us. And something I've been learning is how to identify what a red flag is. And sometimes not all red flags can be seen very easily. I feel like it's fun to put on rose-colored glasses when you're in a situation where you can see, maybe not fun is the right word, but it's easy to put on rose-colored glasses so you aren't seeing, like, the flaws in something or seeing how, like, something could be potentially bad for you. And so we just want to talk about how important it is to be able to identify that and how it shouldn't be something that changes your standards or your values. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the times we think that, I feel like red flags can seem kind of like dumb to us. Oh, like, that's a red flag, because it's become such a big thing in our society. So once it goes out into society and it's taken upon by other people, like, red flags may look different to everyone. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we as Christians have to figure out what red flags look to us, because, like, what red flags look to us may not look like red flags to other people.
Right.
So, like, I feel as if we need to remember that we're held to a different standard than others, and that we have a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, that we have different values than they do and things like that. So a lot of the times we get our own red flags confused with the world's. Right. And so we tend to think something that's actually good for us ends up being bad, or something that's bad for us, we view it as good and don't see it as a red flag because the world is kind of like normalized it almost. So I feel like that's what this episode is going to kind of focus on, is talking more about, like, what the red flags as Christians are, as opposed to, and, like, not focusing on what the world thinks is a red flag and what the world doesn't think is a red flag, but tends to be us.
Right. Sorry, I totally cut you off.
No, you're good.
I totally get that, because I feel like with, like, the friendships that I've had, most of my friends have always been Christians, so we've all had, like, this kind of, like, same biblical standard, or, like, our morals and stuff. And I feel like how, as us as, like, Christians, your worldview is very different because you're basing it off of, like, the Bible. So you have a biblical worldview, and your morals are going to be different from, like, what other people think who aren't Christians or who are a part of other religions. And I think sometimes it's easy to, like, bring judgment into that, and that's, like, one way things can kind of get dangerous with, like, your relationships with people, because if you think that, somebody has an opposing opinion to you, that's a red flag. But in, like, all honesty, sometimes people just are going to have differing opinions, and you can't, like, blame them and say that they're totally wrong just because, like, you don't agree.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Something on the Bible app, there's, like, a 10-day devotional for red flags, and, like, I
was just looking at that.
The first preview literally says God graciously gives us red flags in life. He's faithful to give us warnings regarding our relationships, our decisions, and ourselves. And I feel like that is, like, so true, and you kind of, like, have to really think about that. And I mean, the Bible tells us, like, red flags, whether we realize it or not. Like, there's literally, like, I found a Bible verse, 2 Timothy 3:1-5, where it says, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last day. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying his power, have nothing to do with such people." And I feel like that, I mean, those are all like super good points that we kind of like, we either convince ourselves aren't happening, or like we just don't notice it. Like sometimes it can be like people manipulating you, so you don't always see that. But I feel like that's kind of like when you have to, if you're in a friendship or a relationship, or like even just like a school or work environment, anything, like you have to like look back. If you're starting to feel like really crappy, look at your life and be like, well, how are these people treating me? What are they saying to me? How are these people making me feel? Like, I mean, obviously there's things like dumb little things where you're like, oh, they hurt my feelings. But if like they're constantly treating you very poorly and like more concerned about themselves and how it's affecting them and not affecting you, then I feel like, I mean, obviously that's a huge red flag. And because we're as Christians, I feel like we're like, well, we need to love people and all these things like that and care for them and forgive them and give them grace. But kind of like I talked on the last episode, you can give somebody grace and like forgive them and be like, I understand you made a mistake and stuff, but you also don't have to continue to like stay in that situation. You can be like, I forgive you and I love you, but I'm going to love you from a distance because it's not giving me life, and clearly you don't know what you're doing and you don't know wrong from right. I mean, it's different when people are like, okay, I'm going to be better, and you give them a chance and they do change. But like, if you're giving them chances after chances after chances and they're not changing, it's like, that's affecting you so much more than you're going to realize. I mean, like, multiple times I've been in friendships or in a relationship where like people are just mistreating me, and I either think, oh, well, there's going to be trials and tribulations in friendships and relationships and stuff like that, so it's okay. But like, I think we have to realize that there is a difference between like normal disputes and like messing up and being like saying something you probably shouldn't have. But like, if they're consistently doing something and you're telling them, and they either are making you feel bad about like how that makes you feel, or like they say that they're going to change and they don't, you have to like kind of realize that and be like, okay, like I know that this is not God's best for me, and pray about it, and he's going to like show you that there's like, hey, look at this is a problem, and this is not what I want for you. This is not best for you. I love you guys both individually, or I love everyone in that situation individually, but it's not best for you guys to be together in this situation.
That goes along with a point that I have, is I was talking about this with my dad. He's been like so great at like coming up with just top like notes to write on about these episodes. But like what you kind of said is like, how many times is it gonna be until like you actually remove yourself from a situation? And I think that's when like rose-colored glasses come into play, because you're looking at something, and so if you're looking through those glasses that are the same color as a red flag, you're not going to be able to identify them.
You're only going to see like the highlights of it. And I mean, that goes along with a lot of social media type of things. Like you just see the highlights of everyone's life and stuff like that.
And it's so easy to like take that and say, well, I'm not living like this, so it's not good enough. And that's where like comparison comes into play, and it's just like jealousy. But what I wrote down is, how do you set a healthy boundary with somebody who is toxic, or how many times is it going to take for that person to cross a boundary that you've already set? Or secondly, how many red flags do you have to see in them that they've been like, it's a red flag is honestly, for me, it's a warning sign. So it's not like, oh, this person's horrible because they have this.
It's not like it's some like stupid little thing you're making up yourself. Like it's like that thing said that devotional was talking about. Like it's a red flag from God. God's gonna show you those bad, negative things. Like, yeah, he wants us to love people, but loving people doesn't necessarily meaning you have to keep them in your life. You can be nice to them and be kind to them and care for them, but you can also, like I said, love them from a distance.
Right. And like that devotional went on to talk about, it said, God is our faithful guide and our loving counselor. He promises to lead us through life and will be with us in every season. In his goodness and mercy toward us, he gives us red flags in our hearts if something ahead will bring danger or destruction. And I think, like, you know, when you're driving on the road and stuff, it'll say like road work ahead or like slow down, and there's like warning signs and stuff. So like you're gonna have to get into like one lane or the other, because you can't just keep driving through, because you're gonna cause an accident. And I think that kind of like relates to when you're in a friendship or a relationship, or you're in an environment where you're starting to notice these warning signs and you're seeing like, okay, I need to probably move over this way. Okay, this isn't getting any better. You know, how do you carefully go about that with grace, is like what we talked about in our last episode talking about grace, but also how do you, like as a Christian, also remove yourself from a situation without coming across as judgmental? Because sometimes I think, like, even in the friendships I've had in the past, or like, you know, places I've been or work environments, you always have to have, like, I think it also relates to like having common sense and like being able to identify certain things and not saying, oh, they're just like that. Like, they're just mean in general. You know, sometimes people are just mean, but there's like, that shouldn't be a normalized thing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's just like any bad, like, negative thing in a relationship or in a friendship. Like, I feel as if society has normalized a lot of toxic things.
Right.
And is almost made a joke of it. I mean, like, if you see TikTok, I see TikToks all the time that are like, oh, when I see a toxic, tall, handsome man, and it's like, we kind of tend to focus on things that are like worldly, and we get so excited about them, like looks and money and things like that, and we forget about their actual character and how they make us feel. And I know, as somebody who struggles with severe anxiety, that can also, the fear of missing red flags, or like being afraid that you're almost being dramatic.
Right.
Like, understanding that you're not being dramatic. I mean, there is a certain point where it's like, okay, that's stupid. Why are you getting upset about that?
Right.
But it's like also making sure that you have somebody to talk to about it, and like people that you know and trust that are going to give you good advice about it. Because I feel like a lot of times we kind of keep it all in, and then we're like, well, what do I do? And it can be hard to trust yourself, because I mean, you don't know everything, and you've never been in that situation before, so it's kind of like you don't know what to do. And so if you're not having that communication with other people about like what's going on and things that you're struggling with and stuff like that, we tend to just kind of like ignore it and be like, oh, it'll get better. Oh, you know, maybe they'll change, or we even try to change them. I mean, the amount of times people have either tried to change me, or I've tried to change people thinking that I can do it, or you know, the amount of times that either me or my friends have like started talking to a guy, and we know that there's something wrong about him, and things like he doesn't have the same values as me, or stuff like that, and it's like, but maybe I can change him. Maybe I'll convince him to go to church, and he'll start to, and in very rare occasions that may happen, and sometimes that is God's story for you. But at the same time, it's like, if you can tell, like, God is being like, no, get out of this situation, and you're just kind of ignoring it, then
I feel like you're kind of like disobeying God in a sense, because you know your intuition, like everybody has a gut feeling, and you have a conscience, and you have, you know, if you're a Christian, you have the Holy Spirit, and there's like clear things that like the Bible talks about. And so especially with that, like when you said like the TikTok videos, they seem funny and stuff, but it's like, oh, when he's toxic, abusive, and like all these things, but he has curly brown hair. Like, what on earth is wrong with you? I know it might be a joke, but for some people, like, that's actually real. Like, are you really going to sell yourself short to be in a relationship with somebody because of like outside looks and like, you know?
And I think a lot of the times we tend to kind of like put on rose-colored glasses when it comes to like we want something so bad that we tend to settle. I mean,
Right.
the amount of times that I've settled in friendships or relationships or in situations because I'm like, well, it's never going to get better than this
Right.
and stuff like that. But it's like, if you wait and you wait well, you'll realize that there's so much better out there. And like, yeah, we're not deserving of these things because we sin and we make mistakes, but God's giving us those things. And so like I feel like when we sell ourselves short, a lot of the time God is just like, kind of like, why are you doing that? And is like, almost like not upset, but kind of like disappointed in us because we're not realizing like we deserve so much better. That no, we don't. We do have high standards in a sense, but in a sense, it's not bad to have high standards.
Right.
And I feel like that kind of goes into a lot. I mean, Lena and I have been talking about relationships a lot recently and stuff because I'm in a new relationship and she's still single. And a lot of the times we tend to just like be like, okay, well, why am I not in this relationship and blah, blah, blah. And like, why can't I get guys to like me? And I'm like, well, it's because you have actual standards. And it's like, I'm like, you could definitely be in a relationship right now. I'm sure of it. But because you have standards and a lot of the time people don't and they just could care less about character and things like that, that they just get into a relationship and then it ends up being so toxic and they become someone they don't like or they're becoming sinful. And I mean, it's just, I feel like as a Christian, a lot of the times when I've done something bad or sinful, I just like can feel that guilt and that regret. And it's like, and I felt that with like settling. I'm like, I know that I deserve better than this, but it's like I'm so afraid of giving this up. It's kind of reminds me of like this picture where Jesus is holding like this big, huge teddy bear behind his back, and this little girl has like this very tiny teddy bear and is like, well, I don't want to give this up. And Jesus is just like, no, give this to me and I'm going to give you something better. And it's like we can't see what he's holding behind his back, so it's like we're scared. And I feel like that's where like faith comes into play a lot.
Right.
And it's like, I think if we don't have faith in those situations, then what do we have? Because it's like
you're just kind of relying on your own like standards of what is good and what is bad. And I think you're just relying on your own intuition. And I think yes, it is okay to just like make your own decisions. Like not everything has to be like, should I ask God about this? I mean, obviously you should, but like if it's like a teeny tiny thing and it's like nothing that seems like super bad, like I'm trying to make sense of this, but like not everything has to be like, oh, I should pray about this, or, I should, like, address this in every single biblical aspect if it's, like, just common sense. It's like, oh, he was kind of rude to me. Maybe I should stop talking to him. Or it's just, like, like, kind of just, like, little things like that. And not, like, saying that, I don't know, I'm trying to make it make sense, but
no,
I don't know if it is.
I think it makes sense. I mean, a lot of the times we think that these little things are bigger than they really are.
Right.
And that's where, like, I feel like worry and
like you get anxious about certain stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, it's kind of like when you have a dumb little thought and you like, why did I think that? Like, what's the reasoning behind this? And then you start to get afraid of like either that situation that you thought of happening or like, becoming someone that you're not. I mean, that's what I struggle with a lot is it's like I get really anxious about what people are thinking of me, and then I get scared that I am that person, and so it's like you replay that over and over in your head to like make sure you're not like that, but it's like at the same time you're just sitting there torturing yourself over something you don't want to become and you aren't.
Right.
And it's like, what's the point?
And that's where it's like, that's where God's going to jump in and be like, this is what I already know you to be. And so then that's what you're talking about with faith is like, you're giving him the opportunity to just swoop in instead of you always worrying about the thing. And like, that's something I struggle with is like worrying about the future or worrying about like my career and stuff. And right now, honestly, in my life, like, I know I'm going to summer camp and I'm going to counsel, but I genuinely don't know what I'm doing in the fall.
And I think that's okay, though. Like, we don't have to have our entire life planned out. It's like, even if we do have it planned out, odds are things are going to change. I mean, we just came back from a grad party and I was like thinking to myself, because she was like talking about where she was going and what she was doing. like when I went and had my open house last year, I was saying all these things. I'm going to go here and this is my plan. And now my plans completely changed and stuff like that. Like I was in a completely different situation than I was a year ago. Like I was going to go into business and open up my own coffee shop and clothing boutique. And now I'm not doing that. And I'm going into sports and stuff like that. And so it's like you can plan all you want, but no matter what happens, God's plan is still going to come true to your life. And once you let go of like trying to keep everything planned and clean and in order and stuff like that, it's this weight is going to be lifted off your shoulders and you can just like be yourself and enjoy your life, because no matter how much you worry about something and how much you try to control it, it's not going to work because you have no control over that. I mean, I was talking to Brennan about that the other day because he doesn't really know exactly what he does want to finish when he gets his degree in school and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, at this point you have to control what you can and realize like what happens is all under God's control, and you kind of just have to take it one step at a time. And I mean, that's how I feel like a lot of the times with relationships it is. You can't just shove everything in at once, because a lot of the times that's when you overlook those red flags, because you get so caught up in all the good stuff that you're like, oh, like, but they're so nice sometimes.
Right.
Like,
and same thing with like situations and like a possible job opportunity. I think like that's so hard because you get so excited about something. And that's like the way I am. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so freaking exciting.
Because you've never had something like that before.
And then once you get into it, it's like, oh my goodness, like how did I pass that up? And like, how did I never like identify those things?
Exactly.
And that's like, I feel like that's just being human. So it's like, you're not a horrible person if like you can't see that right away.
Yeah.
But I think like what you're talking about with like the future and like figuring out what you want to do and stuff, and like not letting, you know, like, I don't know, I totally forgot what I was talking about, but where in Psalms 32 it says 32:8 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go, I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. And I think that like also goes into play of like God knows what his plan is for your life. And so like if there's a situation where you're starting to see some warning signs, or like the employees you work with are, you know, being bad, or you're just like,
or they're trying to influence you and stuff like that, and peer pressure. And that's even like not just with employees but like with friends too, and relationships. If they're trying to change you, then it's like,
that's
well,
like a clear sign of,
like, why are you with me if you don't like who I actually am and stuff like that. And so at the end of the day, it's like, you can't let people change you because they want you to become someone else, and you can't try and change someone because you want them to be someone else. When you become your most genuine self and you see people for who they are and who God made them to be and who you are, then at the end of the day, it's like you're going to find so much more joy in life, and you're going to feel so much less worry and stress. And also realizing that, like, yeah, you can miss red flags in the past, but not being so like worked up in your head about it in the future. Because like, I mean, I was like that. I made mistakes and I didn't see red flags that I should have, or I kind of like ignored them and stuff like that because I was just so excited about this one thing that I didn't really care about the other bad things that were like, you know, I was being treated and stuff like that. And so now it's like whenever, when I started getting into a relationship, I get so scared that was going to happen again, and that I was going to miss that. So I would like start to make up scenarios in my head of like that happening, and I'm like, wait, that's not actually happening right now. That's not real. Why am I doing this to myself? It's like, and I feel like you also have to think about the red flags in yourself, not just other people, or even like the way you're reacting, or even in your thought processes. I feel like it's a lot of the time we don't really realize like the way we're thinking about something is like a bad way to be thinking about that.
It's, you have to like remember that like when you're a Christian, you're going to have that spiritual warfare. And I think that's where Satan like comes right in. He's like, okay, this is where I can take Caitlin down a path that I know like can easily distract her.
I feel like a lot of the times we don't realize that Satan tends to attack us most of the time in our heads and in our minds, and we don't really realize it. I mean, something I never truly knew up until the past few years is like, half the time our thoughts aren't really from ourselves, and like they're not something we believe. Just because you think it doesn't mean like that's true or makes it real or anything like that. And so a lot of the times it's like, what are you going to be focusing on, and what are you like taking time to really think about, and is that benefiting you? It's like, you know, if you're thinking about worst case scenario all the time and like worrying about things that you don't need to be, like, I mean, that's a huge red flag in your thought process, and that's just going to end up making your life so miserable. And I mean, it has for me when I do it.
Right. And I think sometimes we see red flags as like so big sometimes, but sometimes I think it can be like a personal thing that you're finally identifying, because I know like it's easy to push past things like, oh, everybody knows me as one thing, so that's who I am, rather than saying, but I know who myself as who I am, and so I know that the way I'm acting now is like not genuine. And what you're talking about is like being your true genuine self, that like you're gonna see like the fruit in that. And I think it's super easy for us to like want to be something different, or like seeing somebody else and saying, oh, they're perfect. Or one thing like I think society has done more is made like, oh, if she doesn't do this, this is a red flag. Or if he doesn't do this, it's a red flag. But rather than saying like, everybody has red flags because they're like, we all are sinners, fun fact. So it's like being a sinner is a red flag. Like, what do you want me to be? Like totally perfect, and I can't do that. And so being able to like be gracious, like what we talked about, and have that kindness and like the joy of the Lord in our heart. And, you know, what did Jesus do for the people that, you know, were like huge sinners in the Bible, and they would cheat people, and they would steal, and they would, you know, they were adulterers. And so like, but Jesus didn't say, shoo, I don't want to be anywhere near you. And everybody saw them as like walking red flags. Oh, you don't want to be near him. Like the tax collectors, get away from them. Like you do not want to associate with them. But Jesus was like, no, come to me, because I can help all you who are weary. I can, you know, I'm here to restore your souls. And so I think that's the way we need to approach things sometimes. So instead of saying, oh, they're a horrible person, they have all these things, like, yes, if it's not a healthy situation and like you see yourself not being able to like protect yourself from that or help them, then take a step back. But also what Caitlin was saying earlier is you can love them from afar and still show them the love of Christ. And I think that goes with situations and jobs and like anything we do in life. Like you still have to be gracious with the love you're giving to people. But if it's too much for you, don't like oversell yourself for that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's a difference between being rude to someone and being
like setting boundaries.
Exactly, because I feel like you being rude to someone would be like completely ignoring them and stuff like that, and like not giving them a reason and not being honest with them and stuff like that. But it's like if you're setting those boundaries, being like, hey, you did this to me and this is really affecting me in a very bad way, and I feel like this isn't giving me life and love, and I'm not feeling like it's just benefiting me in any way. It's not pointing me towards Christ. So you have to be honest with them and open and be like, I mean, I forgive you for what you did, but if you don't turn things around, I can't continue to spend this time with you. Right. I mean, I love you and I hope the best for you, but at the end of the day, my life is becoming this very negative thing, and it's taking me away from God. So it's like, if it's not giving you life and it's taking you away from God, you can distance yourself from someone, but still be kind to them and be like, honest with them and telling them why you need this space and stuff. And I mean, you can still talk to them every now and then, but it's like not making sure you're not constantly spending time with those people who are just like negative towards you and making you feel bad about yourself, or taking you down a bad path and stuff like that.
Right. And I think like that goes along with a note that I was writing. I said, having strong standards is not being picky. It's good to know your worth and to stay true to what you know and what you believe and support. And I think like you have to have boundaries in everything that you do in life, and it doesn't only apply to like relationships or friendships. I think sometimes people think like when you have standards for something, then you're just a picky person, especially for girls. Like, it's just such a stigma that like the world says, oh, girls are too picky, you're never going to find the right guy, you're never going to get married with an attitude like that, or your standards are too high. But what is your standard then? If my standards are too high and I've protected myself from heartbreak, I've protected myself from dangerous situations, I've protected myself from so many horrible possibilities, and you've experienced every bad thing that could happen by not having standards, how are you to like say that my standards are too high?
And I feel like guys tend to say that a lot more, like not us girls saying it to each other. I mean, sometimes obviously we do, but I feel like guys, they just don't want to live up to that situation. And sometimes it's the opposite. I mean, obviously there's guys that listen to this. There's girls that are going to be like, oh, your standards are too high for me. Like, I don't know why you want me to be like that and stuff like that. And I think that they take it in a negative way and they just don't want to do it. And there's a difference between wanting to change and putting in the effort and saying you're going to change but never actually doing it and stuff like that. And so I feel like a lot of the time saying that people have too high of standards tends to be like, they just don't want to be like that. They don't want to live up to that. And it's kind of like being, Jesus has standards of us as Christians and how we're supposed to be. And yeah, he forgives us for when we mess up and things like that. I mean, we're not perfect. And I think like something to remember within those standards is like people aren't going to be perfect, but you still can be like, I don't want to be treated badly. I don't want to be in an unequally yoked relationship or friendship and situation, like things like that. But still understanding that you can still have those standards and not be a picky person. Like, it's like I said, Jesus has standards for us and things that we do.
Right. And I think it's important to evaluate everything with the mindset of like what would Jesus do? How does the gospel explain this situation? And I think like you think about the life of Jesus and how he lived. Obviously, he was perfect and he was being persecuted and people were saying all these blasphemous things about him. And yet, regardless of what people are saying about you or what everybody has like an expectation of perfection or whatever, I think you just have to remember like this is how Jesus still treated those people. And like even though it wasn't a perfect situation for him and he was obviously put in situations that nobody should ever go through, he still had he had God's standard of like, this is how I'm supposed to love people. And I think that's so hard to do sometimes as Christians because like we are all sinners. So sometimes we can like judge other people's sin as worse than our own. But it's like, all sin is the same in God's eyes. So you can't really say like, oh, if somebody in the world who's not a Christian is, going to parties every weekend and doing drugs and all these bad things, like, the typical bad worldly stuff.
I think there's a way where you can tell them that what they're doing is wrong, but not doing it in a rude way. You can be like, hey, I don't believe in this, and I think that this is wrong. I mean, I have friends who, don't really qualify themselves as I'm talking like a 5-year-old.
Christians.
That they either say like they're Christian and they'll go to church on Easter and on Christmas and stuff like that. But when it comes to like biblical stuff, they're like, oh, it's almost like a suggestion. Like, hey, you should do this, but you don't have to and stuff like that. And like, I think they kind of know that I don't agree with that type of mindset, but I'm also like, I'm not going to be sitting there and being like, you need to be doing this and this and this and this and that and that. And I think you can still have your own standards and not do what they are doing, but also not bashing them and stuff like that.
Right, because like even as Christians, we still sin. And like that's kind of what I was getting at is like just because somebody else's sin is worse than yours doesn't make them like a worse person, because even as Christians, we're still going to do things that we regret. But I think like you can't blame somebody if they've never been like raised a specific way or like if they've never been shown the love of Christ. Obviously they're not going to be able to identify that. But I think it's just important to remember like red flags are there for a reason, and God has like like, my mom and I talk about it as, like, a spidey sense. Like, we get this feeling like my mom has, like, the best intuition I've ever seen in, like, a person ever. Like, my dad will be talking about a situation. She's like, no, I totally see this going wrong. He's like, my dad is very gracious, and he's very, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, he's such a sweet person. He's a pastor, so he's got, like, the love for everybody. And my mom is very, like, intuitive. She sees things right away. And I think that's incredible because, like, as a relationship, as my parents are married, like, they've been able to grow together in that, and it works hand in hand. But I think just, like, having intuition on saying, okay, this could be a dangerous situation, let's evaluate it, instead of saying, red flag, get on, whatever, never going to be in my life anymore. Like, you have to, like, if it's super bad, you know what I mean? But, like,
I feel like you have to, with red flags, it's not based upon what you want or what the world views it as. It's all about what God views it as. Because, I mean, a lot of the times we don't want to listen to the red flags. Like, so we'll be like, oh, no, that's not a red flag when it comes to something we want. But if it's something we don't want, then we'll be like, oh, my gosh, that's a red flag. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a difference between actually listening to, I feel like we either abuse it or we don't listen to it, when in reality we don't realize that, like, God's giving us that red flag for a reason and being like, hey, look at this. This is a problem. You need to listen to it, because if you don't, things are going to end up a lot worse than you think they're going to be. Like, oh, it sounds good in the moment, and it's like that temporary happiness instead of long-term joy and stuff like that. So we tend to just kind of, like, ignore it, and we're like, oh, well, this is going to make me happy for a short period of time. So I want that now because I can get it quick, as opposed to kind of, like I've said, like, with waiting in certain situations, not just, like, for, like, the perfect, like, husband or wife or stuff like that, but, like, in any situation, you have to understand that, like, God is showing you these things for a reason, and, like, trusting that and believing in that, because I think a lot of times, like I said, we don't listen to it because we're afraid of being wrong, or, like, you know, I mean, I've been in situations where I kind of was, like, ditzy about it and was like, oh, that's not a problem and stuff like that. And so realizing, like, that you're not always going to make the same mistakes twice, and that you can't just, like, hold that over yourself forever. It's kind of like I was talking about with grace. Like, you can't hold your past mistakes of not seeing something against yourself and, like, constantly worrying that you're going to keep making that same mistake. It's like, if you actually learn from it and stuff like that, then you have nothing to worry about, because, I mean, yeah, God might face you with a similar situation in the future, but God also puts you in that situation in the first place to teach you something, so that if a situation like that happens in the future, you can be like, oh, I've been in this situation. I know what to do now. I know that that's not true, or I know that that's a problem and that's not something good. Like, I feel like we give ourselves a lot less credit than we deserve, and, like, stuff like that. And
I think, like, that just goes to shows, like, you know, God isn't going to put things in your life as, like, he's, like, identifying something to take it away from you immediately. And it's like, God isn't saying you need, you know, it's like a little lightning bug. His light goes on and off every once in a while. And so sometimes that could be God saying, hey, look over here. Hey, look over here. There's something that you need to look over here and see. And you're like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Like, it's fine. It'll be fine. Like, I'm going to be fine. But in like, reality, like, you have to realize, like, God's not putting a warning sign or a red flag, or he's pointing something out to you for a bad reason, because he already knows how this is going to go. And so it's like, you have to remember that, like, God already has that plan ready for you, and, like, he knows the way you're going to react to things and stuff like that, but he's just giving you this as, like, a warning sign to prepare you on, like, how are you going to react to this? Like, are you going to do it biblically, and are you going to address it the way that us as Christians should, or are you going to kind of avoid it because you want it really badly, like what we talked about, or are we going to just avoid it totally and put on those glasses like it's no big deal and just keep going a million miles an hour saying, okay, this is so much fun, all these people are doing all these bad things, I'm just going to join in, or, like, this job isn't what I want and they're doing things that I don't support, but it makes me good money. So it's like, where are your morals going? What is your standards? Like, who are you as a person, and how are you going to, like, let that change you?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes me think of something we've been talking about recently. It's like, how, when you're doing something, you don't really see how that's affecting other people. And so it's like, why? I mean, I just, like, personally, like, I don't understand how people can't have, like, those morals and be like,
Right.
It's like having a conscience. It's like in the back of your head, you know that it's wrong and stuff like that, but you don't really care. And so
We were just talking about this
I
today.
know, that's what made me think about it. But I also, this made me think of something where, like, a lot of the times we kind of just, like, ignore the Bible and push it off. We're like, that's stupid. But, like, in reality, we don't realize that, like, not listening to it actually hurts us so much. Like,
Right.
until, like, we've gone through that situation and we're like, oh my gosh, that was actually right. I should have listened to that.
Like,
and
how many times in the Bible did people disobey God? He's like, you are going to die, but we want to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Okay, well, here's this discipline, and you get this. It's like, how many times did God say, don't do this, don't worship idols, don't do this? And then people are like, well, that guy's been gone up on the mountain for a really long time, so maybe we should just build a golden calf to worship it. Like, are you dumb? Like, are you just going to totally avoid that and say, well, God doesn't want me to enjoy things anyway, so I'll just live life now? Like, it's that whole, like,
we also, like, I feel like we don't think it's gonna affect us as much as it does. It's
right.
like, oh, I'm just gonna
it's
have
only one time.
I'm just gonna get drunk once, or I'm gonna sleep with this person once, and I'm never gonna do it again. Or, like, we tend to kind of, like,
you kind of normalize it.
Or, like, something I heard was, like, we see how far we can, like, push the line, like, how far we can get close to that line of crossing it and where it's bad, where in reality, like, we shouldn't even be trying to get close to it.
Right.
It's like, and I mean, personally, what I've experienced is, like, when I do that, I feel so, like, guilty about it too.
Right.
And it's like, it just makes me feel so sick, and, like, my conscience is just, like, in the back of my head being like, hey, this is wrong and you know it, but just because you're not doing this specific thing, it's okay. But in reality, that's not the truth. Like, you shouldn't even be, like, trying to get near that and, like, associating yourself with those things.
Right.
Because a lot of the times we don't realize, like, the more we do it, the more
it comes like a habit.
Exactly. And habits can be so hard to break too, especially when it's like it makes you feel so good in the moment, but at the end of the day you go to bed and you're like, why did I do that? And then you wake up the next morning and you do the exact same thing and stuff like that.
Right.
You just ignore it and you're like, okay, but it's making me happy right now. But it's like, is that gonna last forever? Like, is this something that's gonna benefit you for the rest of your life, or is it just going to benefit you for 15 minutes and then, you wake
feel
up
like guilty about it?
Yeah.
And I think like kind of ending this podcast is like the biggest thing to remember is like God's placing something in your life for a reason, and He's giving you these identifiers or these warning signs or red flags for a reason. And so He's giving you the opportunity to make a decision on how you're going to react. And I think that's like everything in life. There's always a reaction to every action, whatever. And so how are you as a Christian going to react to this, or how are you going to trust God fully when you don't want to? Because He said, this is not the place for you. And I've shown you, I've brought to light all these red flags, and I've brought to light all these warning signs, and you're still ignoring me. So it's like, I think that's where it comes to like what you're talking about is like you learn by your experiences and stuff. And And so I think that it's so important to remember that there's red flags for a reason, but you shouldn't be making them up in your own mind to make somebody look worse than you are, or to make like the situation look worse. Like what Caitlin was talking about, when it's something you really want, you could totally avoid it, and when it's not, you just don't care at all. But you need to remember that there's a reason why God has given us a conscience. There's a reason why we have our intuition. There's a reason why we can go to the Holy Spirit and we feel, there's conviction with that. And so I think that's just so important to remember, is to just not let your standards change by what the world is saying, or like even what your friends are saying. Like Caitlin and I are very similar, but like, we don't agree on everything that I know of, And so, but it's okay to still honor and respect people and like still love like Jesus would.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. But just to end this episode, just remembering that just because something brings you temporary happiness does not mean that it's going to bring you long-term joy. And the Bible was created for a reason. It's instructions, it's words, it's truth on what brings us life and what doesn't. And at the end of the day, if we don't listen to what God says is good and what God says is bad, we don't realize how much that's going to affect us in the long term. But it's like one of those situations where it's like, do you really want to find out like the negative consequences of those things at the end of the day? And I mean, we're human and we're going to make those mistakes. We're not going to be perfect. And, you know, Jesus didn't even, he was perfect, but doesn't mean like he enjoyed everything he had to do and everything he had to endure. But at the end of the day, you have to make that decision of, am I going to be like what God wants me to be, or am I going to be like the world and just ignore all these bad things of people and how they're treating me and stuff like that? Or am I going to follow what the Bible says and what God says to do and look at those red flags and take them seriously? And I mean, it's like I said, we make jokes about it all the time until it's funny until it happens to you and you realize how much it affects you and stuff like that.
Right, that's good. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. You can follow us on social media, and Caitlin will link that down below. And we look forward to recording our next episode, which we're going to be talking about green flags. And we hope you guys have a great day. We really appreciate your support. We just hit 800 streams, which is so exciting. But yeah, we hope you guys have a great day, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.